These are the three lenses I'm using on a regular basis as a landscape photographer. Now, what I'll talk in this video is benefits for each of these lenses, tips and advices for taking photos or for what you need to be careful when you buy these lenses, things like that. And I also made a list, so this way I make sure that I don't forget anything. I'm getting old, so I need written lists. So let's start with the first lens, and with this one over here. This is the 70 to 200 millimeter f4 image stabilized lens from Canon. Also, another thing that I have to mention, that all these lenses are L lenses, and all these lenses have more than 10 years and they never broke once. So this is something that I need to say from the start. Now, why I started this video with this lens. This is the lens I use the less. I use it very rarely, but nevertheless it has its benefits. And one of the benefits is that you can isolate the subject really easily because of the long focal length. Now you can also separate the subject very easily, also because of the long focal length, but only if the subject is roughly close to you, a couple of meters, and then the background is really far away from the subject, or there is a consistent distance between the subject and the background, and then you create that beautiful bokeh, that beautiful blur behind the subject, and you can separate it. It's not always something that you want as a landscape photographer, but it's a good option to have. Another plus of using this lens is that there is less perspective distortion because of the long focal length. Another thing is that when you use that longer focal length, like 200 millimeters, for example, you compress the fields. Now, by doing that, you get a certain perspective with the shot. You're losing the feeling of depth and the feeling that there is space between different layers in the landscape, but still you have a really interesting perspective and dynamic in the photo. Now, let's go to tips and advices. If you buy one of these lenses, my advice is to always have one with image stabilization, because even if you're going to use this lens as a landscape photographer on a tripod, from time to time you'll want to shoot from hand, and if you don't have image stabilization, it's going to be really hard. If you're going to use this lens primarily for landscape photos, this means 80% of the cases or 90% of the cases you're doing landscape photos with this lens, then you should go for an f4. Why? Well, it's half the price and half the weight of a similar lens with f2.8. And a side tip, if you're using this on a DSLR, then you should use the mirror lockup function to avoid any shakiness in your photo. Now let's move to the second lens, and this is the Canon 17 to 40 millimeter f4 L lens. One of the great benefits of this lens is the fact that it has a really short focus distance, and that is only 17 centimeter, and because of that you get really close to the foreground elements and you have a really beautiful and dynamic perspective to your photos. Another thing is that this perspective creates a certain dynamic, and also the photos give you the impression that you are there in the landscape. You're kind of surrounded by the landscape rather than a simple observer from a distance that you get by using this lens. Now, a few tips and advices with this lens. If you decide to buy a circle polarizer for this lens, get the slim version or the wide version of the polarizer to avoid vignetting. Another thing is that because it's so wide at the 17 millimeter end, there's a lot of the landscape that gets into this lens and eventually on your photo. But this doesn't mean that you always have to incorporate everything. there's a certain way in which you have to learn to use a wide angle lens. And sometimes it sounds strange, but the idea is not to photograph everything. It gives you the ability to be really close to the landscape. So it's a thing that you have to master in time. A tip, something that you have to be really careful. Wide-angle lenses emphasize the foreground and diminish the background. And this means that you have to choose your position very carefully and the subject very carefully, because you may end up with a subject really small in the shot. Now, before moving to the third lens, which is my favorite, now before moving to this lens, let me tell you a few words about Zyro, which is the sponsor of the video from today. Now, I recently teamed up with Zyro because I needed to have a much more professional looking website, and I needed to have this website easy to build and affordable. And these are some of the things that I found with Zyro. Their services are being offered at very competitive prices. If you only need a portfolio website, for example, you only have to pay $261. So it's really cheap, and you have unlimited storage, and you also have a free domain for that for the first year. I'm using their business plan, and I only pay $4.41 per month, and I wanted that because I also needed the e-commerce side, because I wanted to be able to sell my ebook or my online courses, or maybe spots to my workshop. Another thing that I wanted was that the website could be very easy to build, and Zyro is really user-friendly. You just drag and drop everything. You create a page, for example, you say, okay, I want this page to be visible or not in the main menu. Let's add a section to this page, and in that section you have all sorts of elements. You have text, you have galleries, images, also all sorts of elements. So you design your website visually. They help you a lot with having lots of templates that are already made. You just need to configure those templates. But I found out that using their AI to generate the first version of the website, it was very intuitive and easy. I chose the font, the pages that I wanted, and the website was created. And from that point on, I just had to customize it. And every time I had a problem, they have a 24/7 live chat support, and they helped me figure out the problem and continue building my website. And you also get your money back in 30 days. So there is no risk in testing their service. You can grab Zyro's deal for a limited time only. You get an exclusive limited time discount plus 3 months for free and a free domain for a year with any yearly plan. Use my code PHOTOTOME or the following link to get the exclusive deal. And now we're back to the main video, and now let's talk about my favorite lens, which is the 24-105 image stabilized f4L lens from Canon. And this is the lens that I use the most, and this is not something that I say just like that. It's statistics. Lightroom shows me that this is the lens that I use in most of my photos. And as a side thing, the focal length that I mostly use, it's roughly 35 millimeters. It's give or take. Now, this all-around lens, it's really good because you have a relatively wide angle at 24, and then 105 millimeters is kind of like a telephoto. And when you're using this lens on a mirrorless camera, you can switch to crop mode and you get 105 millimeters multiplied with 1.6 or 1.5, depending on what camera you're using this. This lens is perfect for when you go photographing inside cities or inside a forest, or when you have lots of other gear that you need to carry on, and you can't go with all these three lenses, because believe me, these two add up. If you have to carry also these two lenses, for multiple days. You're going to feel it. Again, as a side tip, if you're going to buy a polarizer, use the slim version of the wide angle version of that polarizer. Also, in time, this lens, this lens has 12 years right now. You see that it also lost the red ring that makes this lens an L lens from Canon. It lost it, but it never broke. The thing that happens with this lens is that in time it can become loose, and sometimes you will need a rubber band to fix the zoom ring, just to make sure that it doesn't move when you're exposing. So these were the 3 lenses that I'm using. Let me know what lenses are you using. Let me know which lens is your favorite, and don't forget about Zyro's deal. And if you want a professional looking website, you can get one at very reasonable prices. So just use my code for the Tom, or the link that you can also find in the description of this video to get this exclusive deal. Thanks for watching, and until next time, keep on photographing, because it's the only way you can get better. Bye bye.